The East India Company didn't arrive in India with an army. They arrived with a request, a foot in the door as traders. But behind the silk, they hid cannons. They waited. They grew. And then came wars. Swallow, Plassey, Buxar. At Plassey, victory was bought, not won. Their throne was built on betrayal. India fought back from the south to the heart of the Marathas. Empires moved. Blood was paid. Until the land finally erupted. One bullet changed everything, not just soldiers, queens, farmers, princes, together. And still, it wasn't enough. How did a trading company end up on India's throne? Is the story of how it happened. The year was 1608. A British ship dropped anchor at Surat, not with an army, but with requests. Permission to trade, they asked. Just cloth, just spices, nothing more. But the Mughals were not impressed. As rulers of one of the richest empires on earth, they had seen traders come and go, bringing silk, silver, and sweet promises. Most came, traded, and left. But one stayed, the Portuguese. They built stone forts along India's coast, fired cannons from their ships, and raised their flag across the sea. They even reached the Mughal court, creating fear, warning about new traders, and influencing decisions. They blocked British ships, spread doubt, and made the Mughals wary of every new outsider. By the time the British arrived, the Mughals had learned their lesson. Trade was never just trade. To them, the British were just another foreign fleet knocking at the gates of Hindustan. Years passed. Proposals were rejected. Gifts were exchanged. Envoys were turned away. But the British waited, adapted, tried again. In 1612, off the coast of Surat, in the lands we now call India, the British and the Portuguese clashed at sea. The Battle of Swallow. The Portuguese tried to block them, seizing British cargo, cutting off trade, claiming Mughal sea lanes as their own. Then, the cannons roared, waves shook, ships cracked, but the British East India Company held firm and struck back with force. They won. Word soon reached the Mughal court. A foreign fleet had defeated the Portuguese. Perhaps they could be useful. And in 1613, they succeeded. Emperor Jahangir, ruler of Hindustan, granted them a farman, permission to trade, not to rule, not to conquer, just a foot inside the door. And so, the British East India Company stepped onto Indian soil as guests. Welcomed with farmans, granted trading ports, given promises. They came to open factories, not forts, with ledgers in hand, not swords at their side. And India opened its doors. What followed was prosperity. The trade was good, too good. Cotton from the south, indigo from the east, spices from the coast. Coin flowed like rivers, but only one direction. And with the profits came the forts. In Madras, in Bombay, in Calcutta, walls rose where markets once stood. The British weren't just buying goods anymore. They were buying ground. And behind every warehouse, a cannon waited. They came as traders and stayed as something more. For generations, the British East India Company did business on Indian soil. Fathers traded, sons followed, and with each passing year, their roots grew deeper. No armies, just ledgers and promises, but behind every promise, a plan. They signed treaties by day and broke them by night. They bowed to kings then crowned their rivals. They paid taxes with one hand and collected them with the other. From Surat to Madras, from Bombay to Calcutta, every trade post became a foothold, every warehouse a stronghold in disguise, and India watched it happen, slowly, silently. From 1613 to 1756, India changed hands, not with swords, but through promises. The company had grown bold. They fortified without permission, sheltered enemies of the throne, ignored the laws of the land. So in 1756, the young Nawab of Bengal, Siraj-ud-Dowlah, acted. He stormed Fort William in Calcutta. For a moment, the British were exposed, forced out, humiliated. But humiliation was the excuse they needed. A year later, they came back. This time, not just with soldiers, but with bribes. Mir Jafar, a commander in Siraj's army, took their silver. And when the battle came, he stood still. Siraj was betrayed. Bengal was lost. And in a single rainy afternoon, the East India Company became a kingmaker. The company crowned Mir Jafar as Nawab of Bengal, and just like that, they weren't just traders. They were the power behind the throne. The battle that made it possible was called Plassey, not won with courage, but with betrayal. But Bengal soon saw the truth. The British weren't here to rule fairly. They were here to extract. Gold flowed out, grain was hoarded, famine followed, and Bengal bled. In 1764, Bengal rose again. So did Awadh. So did the Mughal crown. 3 thrones stood together in a battle they thought would reclaim their power. The British called it Buxar, but the company crushed them all. 3 thrones defeated in one blow. And after that, they taxed Bengal harder, drained it deeper, until even loyalty became too expensive. They didn't need kings. They took the tax. They ruled the East. In the South, they met fire. Tipu Sultan, fierce, unyielding. From 1767 to 1799, he fought them again and again. Even when his sons were taken hostage, he did not kneel. He died with a sword in hand, not chains, and the South fell silent. In the West, the Marathas rose, fierce, proud, unyielding. They fought the British in 3 wars. 1775, they won. 1803, they lost ground. 1818, they fell. But not quietly, not without fire, and not without leaving a mark that history cannot erase. The Mughal emperor still sat in Delhi, but his throne meant nothing. Across the land, the company moved like smoke. In Awadh, they removed the Nawab. In Bengal, they took the treasury. In Hyderabad, they became the court's advisors. They ruled through treaties, not battles, through tax, not titles. The Red Fort still stood, but it was hollow. The empire was alive, but already lost. And then, in 1857, the cracks burst. Some called it the Sepoy Mutiny, but it wasn't just soldiers. It was the revolt of a wounded people, land taken, princes dethroned, faith insulted, dignity broken, and still they obeyed. Until they were asked to bite the bullet. They said it was just a cartridge, just a new rifle, just protocol. But to bite it was to betray your own faith. The cartridges were greased with cow fat, sacred to Hindus, and pig fat, forbidden to Muslims. One bite, and centuries of belief were shattered. They weren't just being asked to load a rifle, they were being asked to surrender their identity. It began in Meerut, where anger had been building for weeks. 85 sepoys were punished, publicly humiliated for refusing to bite the new cartridges. And on May 10th, 1857, they struck back. Meerut burned. Delhi called. The rebellion had begun. They torched the officers' quarters, burned the records, and cut the communication lines. By midnight, Meerut wasn't a mutiny. It was the signal. And they marched toward Delhi, not as soldiers, but as rebels. They weren't alone. Across towns and provinces, the fire spread. Peasants, princes, soldiers, Hindus and Muslims, side by side. This wasn't just a mutiny, it was unity. And for the first time, the British looked afraid. The fire spread. Kanpur rose. Lucknow resisted. Jhansi fought back. And it wasn't just men. Queens led armies. Rani Lakshmibai of Jhansi rode into battle, fighting British troops with her young son strapped to her back. Princes reclaimed their flags. Civilians took to the streets. The company's rule, once untouchable, was suddenly burning. For a moment, it looked like the British might fall. For the first time, India stood together. It felt possible. It felt close. It felt real. But it didn't last. There was no single leader. No plan strong enough to hold everyone. No supplies. No reinforcements. No outside help. Some kept fighting. Some surrendered. Some were betrayed. The British regrouped. And then they came back. Hard. They didn't just fight. They punished. They burned cities. They tore through towns. They executed without trial. One by one, the strongholds fell. Lucknow, Delhi, Jhansi, all crushed. What began as hope ended in silence. What began with unity ended in fear. They made sure India remembered, not the dream, but the consequence. For a moment, it looked like everything could change. For a moment, the empire shook. But in the end, they took it all back. For the first time in centuries, Hindus and Muslims fought together, sepoy and queen, farmer and prince, and in that unity, the British saw fear. So they divided. Maps were redrawn, regiments split, loyalty, branded by religion. They wouldn't fight unity again. They'd erase it. The company returned to Delhi and ended it all. The Mughal emperor, Bahadur Shah Zafar, old, weary, and powerless, was accused of leading the rebellion. He was captured and exiled to Rangoon. His sons were executed at the gates of the city, shot without trial, their bodies left on public display. The Mughal dynasty ended not with a final battle, but with a warning. This is what happens when you challenge the company. The empire wasn't just defeated, it was erased. The British Crown saw what the company could not, that 1857 was only the beginning of something far more dangerous. Revolt, rage, and a land too valuable to lose. So they stepped in. The British Crown dissolved the East India Company in 1858, not to end the looting, but to organize it better. India would no longer be ruled by traders, but by a throne across the sea, not to liberate, but to extract deeper, wider, and without challenge, from trade to empire. The company built the road, the crown took the throne. 1857 wasn't the end, it was the beginning. Watch India's independence, 1857 to 1947, next.